Welcome to the TruGolf Academy. You've joined me, Jon Watts, today in my swing studio. And today's video is all going to be about the setup. So I'm going to show you what I see is the 3 most common mistakes I see at setup. If you get these 3 points correct, I guarantee you're going to strike the ball better and play more consistent golf. So, as I said, this is all going to be about the setup, and we're actually going to be talking about the setup with an iron. I'm going to do it slightly differently with a driver because I potentially see a couple other points in there, and I'm going to go through the 3 most common mistakes I see and how this is going to affect your golf. So point number 1 at setup position for me would be an overflexing of your knees. So I see a lot of players when you're told, especially if you're a beginner golfer, you're told to flex your knees, and people tend to perceive that as an overdoing it, a really sitting down, squatting movement. The problem I see when players tend to overflex their knees is their pressure tends to be back into their heels. And this relates to sort of point number 2 that I'm going to go on to in a second. But when the pressure is back into the heels, the most common fault I see in the first movement is the club being brought way on the inside, too much around the player. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. So if the club is working too much around you on the backswing, we'll generally see a change of direction on the way down. I would suggest that of amateur golfers, it's a high percentage. It's got to be maybe 60 to 70% are making a swing path on the downswing from out to in across the golf ball. From there, we're going to see pulls to the left for a right-handed golfer, fades or slices to the right. We often see missed strikes as well. You would think heavy, but the compensation often can be lifting up and players blaming on lifting head and all sorts of things. But I see this far too often, the club working around your body in that first takeaway movement, the pressure is back into the heels, and then the compensation is a much steeper downswing, and often it's related to what's happening here. So what I really want you to try and do is create more pelvic tilt. So that is the feeling of pushing your backside back, tilting forwards from your hips. It may even help to hold the club across your hips. Push your thumbs into your hip bones and just feel like you're pushing that back as far as you can, keeping your shoulders back. So we're getting a nice straight back angle while we create this pelvic tilt. Legs are pretty straight, and then I just soften them. So that's a better word than flex. Soften your knees. So they're not locked, they're just softened, not flexed here. So that will mean that your pressure is more towards the balls of your feet. So for me, there's almost 4 places your pressure could be. Toes, balls of feet, which is somewhere nearing the first lace of your shoe or just ahead of it, arch of your shoe here, or into the heels. So we want the pressure to be more balls of feet, and ideally we want it to stay balls of feet. Although it's shifting to the right and shifting to the left, the pressure is going to stay around our balls of our feet. If we start in the wrong position, it's really hard to get back into the right movement. Now, when I talk about these things, there may be a player who has that as an issue, but it doesn't cause them a fault. You know, if they make a compensation on the downswing and they do it consistently, then I'm not worried about it. But these are the 3 most common faults I see at setup and how they affect the golf swing. So if they're affecting your golf swing, there's something to look at. So that was point number 1. Point number 2, I'm going to go into, it's got a similar effect, but I tend to see the hands just too high, the handle of the golf club too high, and often the end of the grip is pointing above your belly button, maybe towards the bottom of your rib cage. So we see these high hands at setup. That often is players trying to get the club flat to the floor. Actually, we would like the toe of the golf club slightly up in the air. I'll show it to this camera. So we actually want to start with the toe. If this was the ground level, we want to start with the toe of the golf club slightly up in the air. And the reason we do that is something called toe down effect. The shaft is bending or bowing this way on the downswing, so it's going to flatten out the toe of the golf club, and our hands are always getting pushed slightly higher at impact than they were at setup. The better the golfer, the closer they get to maintaining that, but pretty much all golfers are getting a little bit higher. So don't try and feel like you're soling that club to the floor. Allow that toe to sit slightly up in the air. If we do get these high hands and this end of the club pointing too high, it often results in a very palmy grip as well. So I often see it related. If the handle gets high, the grip has no choice but to be running way up into the palm of your hand. And we often see golfers wearing out their glove very high up here, and we really want it to be more down in the fingers. And often it's a result of these first two parts, overflexing the knees and the hands getting very high. They've got no choice but to get a very palmy grip. Palmy grip, so high up in the hands, is very good for control, putting, chipping. It's just very poor for generating speed and power because it really stops us using our wrist correctly in the backswing and in the downswing. So I see these hands high, the end of the grip pointing very high, and often the result of that is a very palmy grip. Now, as an exercise, what I was just thinking, and this is a really simple one, is just push a T-peg in the end of the grip. And when you're practicing, just make sure that T-peg is pointing below your belly button towards your belt buckle. Obviously, people may change how high they wear their trousers, so forgive me on that, but you'll get the idea, definitely below belly button. So my setup position would be pelvic tilt, just a soften of the knees. We don't want to overflex them. And the handle of the golf club is pointing close to my belt buckle. As I'm looking down, I'm seeing the toe of the golf club just slightly up in the air. And that feels a lot more athletic. I can feel my pressure towards the balls of my feet. The other checkpoint I'm looking at, if you do use some mirror work behind you, is you can actually see a slight change in angle from my left arm to my club shaft, my lead arm to my club shaft here. If I get very high hands, you'll almost see how my left arm is an extension of the club shaft. And again, that will set this club way up into my palm. So that's point number one and point number two. As I said, I do see them related. We see overflex the knees, handle very high. My third fault I generally see at setup is most right-handed golfers, and you won't necessarily see this on the practice area, so do get onto the golf course or a grass practice area where you can actually aim at different targets and you haven't got a mat down or any alignment aids. But I see most right-handed golfers aiming too far right of target. Strangely, most left-handed golfers aim too far left of target. So when I'm seeing a golfer, and I'm going to talk about right-handers here, so when I see golfers aiming too far right, that may just be their body line, it may be everything, but when they're aiming right of target, they'll generally make some kind of compensation in the downswing to try and pull the ball back to the target. So the amount of golfers I see that aim right and make an over-the-top swing to try and pull the ball back to target. Now, they might be successful in that. They might actually get the ball going down the target line, but it's going to be a very low flight. It's going to be a very steep angle of attack. The strike gets harder. You may be okay and get the ball first, but if it's soft ground conditions and we're getting a steep swing, it only has to be a fraction early before the golf ball, and we'll know about it. You'll lose a lot of distance. So I see a lot of problems when golfers start aiming off line. Sometimes it's just the concept. So this is my target line where I want the ball to go. That's where I want the club to point. I need to make sure that my body line is parallel left of that. Your feet, knees, hips, shoulders, forearms are going to appear to be a good 10 yards to the left of the target line. So I get a lot of, again, beginner golfers where they're trying to aim their body at the target. I want the club at the target, I want your body parallel left. I know we're only around 3 feet or so from the ball, but you put them clubs down there, club line, feet line, or body line, and you will see a huge difference to where they're pointing. Your body line is definitely going to be appearing left of target for a right-handed golfer, and obviously the opposite for a left-handed golfer. So when alignment is off, I see some real faults in terms of this over-the-top, out-to-in swing path, similar to point number one. So a quick recap on those. Point number one is the common mistake I often see is overflexing of knees, pressure back into the heels. Point number two, my common mistake I often see is a very high handle position, creating a palmy grip. And point number three, I often see at setup, I'd say these are the most common, is players aiming offline. So right-handed golfers generally to the right, left-handed golfers too far to the left, and making some kind of swing change to compensate, and that causes some real problems, or can cause some real problems. I'm going to go ahead and try and get in a good setup position. Obviously alignment is a lot easier for me here on a driving range mat, especially with all these lines on here. That's where I want you to practice it off the grass. So I'm set up, I'm looking for the toe slightly up in the air. I'm just going to click so you will see the ball flight. So the toe of the golf club is going to be slightly up in the air. I want a pelvic tilt forwards, keeping my shoulders back. I can start with my legs straight and then just soften my knees. So my pressure is definitely balls at my feet. Checkpoint is the end of the grip is pointing below my belt buckle. And that means I've got much more a finger grip here, so much more in my fingers rather than in my palm. And I know my alignment is actually pretty good, but I do, as I said, have these alignment aids to help. Let me go ahead and just try and hit one from that athletic start position. So the strike felt really solid, pretty good distance on it, just a slight fade, but 160 carry, 170 finish, 88 miles an hour. You can only start to generate some speed when you're really getting into a good athletic start position like that. So I know it's going to help you if you can nail that setup position. If you did enjoy the content of that video, make sure you give us a thumbs up. Do subscribe, it's the easiest way to stay in touch. There's 3 new videos every Monday, Wednesday and Friday. I will do a follow-up part of this to do with the driver, and there is going to be a series that I'm doing of 3 common mistakes. I think it's a really good way to hit home about the faults I tend to see with most of my pupils or amateur golfers at the golf club. Thanks guys, we'll see you soon.